Everyone, sorry for the slight delay. Had a few technical problems, but our trusty AV team was able to solve them. So we will start our GreenTalk now. This is GreenTalk number 6. We have speakers from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and they are Samantha Greene and Karen Koppett, and I'll give you a little bit of background on both of them. Samantha is a senior water resources specialist in the Water Supply Planning and Conservation Unit at the Santa Clara Valley Water District, now known as Valley Water. She is a PhD and an MS from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a focus on water resources management and geomorphology. And at the Valley Water, she's responsible for leading and coordinating the water supply modeling and analysis efforts. A little bit about Karen. Karen is a senior water conservation specialist with the Santa Clara Water Valley District, now known as Valley Water, and she has been with the district for 15 years with a major focus of her work on water use, efficiency, in the commercial, industrial, and in institutional sectors. And she has a BA degree in political science from UC Santa Cruz, and she's an SJSU alum. She has a MS in environmental studies. Okay, so I'm going to turn the podium over to them. We'll have Samantha first, and then followed by Karen. So let's give them a warm 100W welcome. Okay. Are you okay?
It's on. Thank you for inviting us to come speak about the Water District and water supply planning and conservation that we do there. So at Valley Water, we have 3 main goals for Santa Clara County residents. The first is to provide clean, reliable water supply for drinking, flood protection, and healthy creeks and ecosystems. And so what I'll be going into today, as well as Karen, is how we make sure that over the years we provide a clean, reliable water supply. And so Valley Water is a water wholesaler as far as water supplies go, and so you will not directly buy water from us. You buy it from your retailer. So for example, San Jose Water Company is a retailer that buys their water from us. And so we manage the groundwater system and as well as the treated water system that eventually will make it to you. Ooh. We're here to serve water and represent resident needs and desires, and the way that is done is through our board. And so we have 7 district board representatives that are elected by you, and you can see who your representative would be on this map. And so through them, we get communication as to the types of concerns you have with water in the county and the types of projects and infrastructure you're interested in. And so over the years, we have been making a lot of investments to provide a reliable water supply. And you can see this graph goes, or this image goes from the early 1900s to present. And so when settlement first really got going here in Santa Clara County, there was a lot of groundwater pumping, which caused the land surface to fall, called subsidence. And so this falling land surface created a lot of issues for infrastructure, as well as threatens the long-term reliability of water supply. And so in response, we made many investments, such as reservoir constructions and imported water deliveries to the system to ensure that our groundwater stays healthy. And that's still our goal today, is figuring out what do we need to do to make sure that we halt subsidence and maintain a healthy groundwater system, despite a growing population. And so to do this, we use a water supply planning framework that has 4 steps. The first is determining your potential is up at the top, is determining potential future demands and supplies. Then we go around and we need to, once you have your demands and you know what your current supplies are, you can figure out what your supply shortage may be in the future. And then you assess different investment strategies for meeting that shortfall. Then you take a chosen investment strategy. The board will make this ultimate decision, and you have to monitor it because there's a lot of uncertainties out into the future. And as you monitor it, that'll bring you back up to the beginning, figuring out as things have changed, as we know more, what do our future demands look like, and so on. And so I'll start with the top, future demands and supplies. So historically, population has increased in the county. And however, water demands, what has happened is in the recent history, the past few decades, is not as straightforward. So the blue is the water demands, the orange is the population. And so you can see water demands is really variable. It's impacted by economics, it's impacted by climate, not just population growth. And so we're tasked, however, with figuring out what we think out several decades from now demands might look like so that we can be sure to meet them. And so we do some demand modeling and we graph out what those will look like into the future. And we look at several different time points. However, for our investment strategies, we're really focusing right now on year 2040, so approximately mid-century, to ensure that we have enough water supplies to meet those 2040 demands. And so once we have a demand projection, then we can see what our current supply portfolio looks like, and will it still meet those projected demands. So our supplies are a diverse, complex mixture. So it comes from the imported water system, that State Water Project and Central Valley Water Project. And that water comes from the Sierra Nevada mountain range. It's in dams such as Shasta Dam, as an example. And so we bring that in. For example, the Federal Water Project will come in through San Luis Reservoir into our system, where State Water Project generally comes up from the north into our system. And so that makes up more than half of our supplies. Then we also have a significant local supply reservoir. We have 10 different reservoirs, and conservation is extremely important for meeting demands. And then we also are investing in recycled water. When we're planning to the future, though, we need to think about how those supplies might change, because just because we have a certain amount of local water now doesn't mean it will be there in the future, or perhaps there will be more. There's a lot of sources of uncertainty, whether it's climate change, regulations, and technological innovations, making conservation much more feasible, for example, politics and economics. And so from this graph, I'm not going to piece it apart. It's just one of our potential scenarios. And the idea here is based on just looking at a climate change uncertainty. There's this band of uncertainty this band of the amount of supplies you could expect. And so we know that there's this cone of uncertainty, as some people like to refer to it as, in what supplies may look like in the future. And so step 2 is then once we have our demands and supplies, let's look at our potential shortage. To do that, it requires modeling. And so we have a operation planning model that is about as complex as our water supply system. This is just a screenshot at the county level of all of the interactions among our different supplies. And it requires a lot of information to build this model. And so, for example, we need our groundwater recharge information, which also comes from modeling. Imported water deliveries comes from modeling as well. Local reservoir inflows. That'll be a combination of historical information, as well as if you're going to look at the impacts of climate change, then that's going to come from downscaled global climate model data. Evaporation is important as well, and demands. And so it's a model built on other models. And so it can provide you a lot of information, but also you can do a lot of different scenario testing with it too. So you use this to figure out then, major take home from our water evaluation and planning model is, do we have shortages? And so one example is on average, in an average supply year, can we meet our needs of the county, or do we have a shortfall? And then in drought supply years, how big is our shortfall? The goal of Santa Clara County is to always meet average water supply conditions. So in our planning then, we're going to try to figure out what investments do we need to close this gap. Drought years are a little bit different. In drought years, we say we want to meet 80% of needs, of demands, and that's because we would meet that other 20% with water use reductions. So for example, in this last drought, residents were able to save almost 30%. They reduced their water use almost 30%, which is really great. And so that'll take care of some of this shortfall, where investments we'll need to figure out investments to meet that other portion. So what investments? How do we determine what to do? There's a lot of different types of projects we look at the water district. There is expanding storage, so this would be expanding our reservoirs. Then there's different types of conservation projects, such as water efficient landscapes, toilets. We have a long range of rebates that Karen can talk a whole lot more about. There's stormwater capture, more recycled water, different approaches for water recycling, as well as increasing groundwater recharge. And so we look at all these different types of projects. We put it within that WEEP model and figure out how well does it do. Sorry, WEEP is the Water Evaluation and Planning Model, to figure out how well does it do to close that gap and at what cost. And then we do our outreach. And so we work with the board of directors. They give us feedback on this long list of projects. If you actually look at any of our board meetings where we have project lists, I think it's almost like a 12-page document of different lines of projects that we look at. And they help us weed that out, saying, you know, I think this is what's most important, or what people would be most interested in our district. And then we also work with other stakeholder groups. So for example, our retailers, so they're the ones who sell you the water, and environmental groups and so on, to figure out what are their thoughts on the different investment strategies. Then we choose an investment strategy. And so the current investment strategy at the district has 3 pillars to it. The first is to secure our existing supplies and infrastructure. Right now, the projects we are focusing most on are California water fix and dam seismic retrofits. However, as things change, we'll always be reassessing how these projects can help us secure our existing supplies and infrastructure. Then there's expanding conservation and reuse. And then finally, there's optimizing the system. And so with optimizing the system, examples of that is Pacheco Reservoir, which would allow us to bank more of our imported supplies locally. And then also the Transfer Bethany pipeline. So what that would be is it acts as an additional straw to pull off water from the delta from. So it gives us more access to our state water project water. So they don't necessarily increase the amount of water we get, but they increase our ability when we can get it, essentially. So the level of service goal, I alluded to this a little bit earlier as well. And so this is how much of this shortfall are we trying to make up with infrastructure investments. And so over the past few years, the district has done a pretty big outreach effort trying to understand how much residents and retailers are willing to, what their balance is between wanting investments in new water supplies versus going to water use reductions during droughts. And essentially what we found is that because of this last drought, people are very willing to do some water use reductions if we're in a drought. And so originally, the level of service goal was to meet 100% of demands in normal years and 90% of demands in drought years. However, it has been updated to 80% of demands during drought years. Because instead of spending an extra $1 billion, for example, to meet 90% of demands, residents said they'd rather save that money and instead conserve during droughts 20%. And so that's how we came up to this new level of service goal, which the board adopted in January 2019. So with this approach and all the projects that fit into the strategy, there are these uncertainties, whether it's climate change or new regulations to the Delta, political changes, economic changes. We need to follow all of those. And so as we look at how projects are progressing, we may find that, this actually doesn't provide as much water as we thought it would. It should be replaced with a different project that we have also been tracking and should enter the strategy instead. Or maybe demands don't increase like we thought. So for example, the recent drought we had, usually there is a pretty significant rebound in demands after drought. However, this rebound hasn't occurred yet, where in the past, if you look at our historical data, it should have happened already, but people are still conserving almost 20%. And so maybe demands are less in the future than we had thought, would be one example too. That can change our investment strategy. And so with that, to summarize, the overall goal is to figure out how to close that gap, make sure we can provide a reliable water supply out into the future. And we do that by consistently monitoring our demands and supplies to determine our shortfalls, following various projects and investment strategies to fill those shortfalls, and then monitoring that chosen strategy and continuing to reassess as things change. And so with that, I'm going to let Karen talk about conservation.
Sorry. My microphone, hi, can you hear that? Okay, good. All right, now it's on. Great. It was blinking green and red, which can't be good. Hi, everybody. Hang on just a second. Let me secure my mic. And great, I'm so happy to be here. Karen Koppett, Senior Water Conservation Specialist at the Santa Clara Valley Water District, also known now as Valley Water. We rebranded for the first time in a long, long time, so we're Valley Water now. I was a graduate student here at San Jose State, and it's really cool to be visiting your campus. So while Samantha and I work in the same unit at the Santa Clara Valley Water District. We work in water supply planning and conservation, and Samantha, you can tell, is the water modeling genius in our unit, and runs these really, really complicated models and does some really incredibly complex planning for our unit. And I'm the Senior Water Conservation Specialist, and while we do two different things, they really are This is a picture that was taken at Almaden Reservoir during the height of the drought. That is a local reservoir in San Jose. It is a Pinto. If you recall what a Pinto is, it's made by, I think, by Ford. And that sucker was probably buried in there in the 70s. And in fact, there was a whole archaeological group of people that would go to, during the drought, that would go to these empty reservoirs and would go and check out cool things that came up that were unearthed during the drought. So that was, I guess, an upside for them. Downside for us is that it practically killed me. The drought was incredible, and I'm really grateful that it ended. I have a hard time imagining what would have happened if we had had a couple more years of drought. We're very careful planners at the Water District, as I'm sure you could tell from what Samantha said. However, there are just some things that we can't get away from, and that is when a really major historic drought hits us. So let's talk about drought in California. So this is a great slide from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's from their website, and it shows you California is their drought index from 1895 to 2019. That's basically 125 years. And you can see that droughts in California, what do you think? You think they're getting better, or you think they're getting worse? And the answer there is they're getting worse. So you can really tell. Look at the far right side of this. Thank you. Great. Perfect. Okay, now I don't have to really belt it out. So they're getting worse in California, and that's just how it is in California. However, we're lucky. It's funny to give this kind of talk on a day that's a little bit rainy. It's hard to convince people that drought is a way of life here in California. This is from the National Drought Monitor, and you can see it's from March, pretty much the same week. The one on the left is from 2019, the one on the right is from 2016. So this year, thankfully, we are not in a crazy drought. Imagine, you probably remember how it was just a couple of years ago when our state looked like that on the right. It was a really stressful time for everybody. But there's more coming, and you should all know that. This is a great quote. It comes from Capital Public Radio in Sacramento, and this is a quote from Chris Orlock from the California Department of Water Resources, who says, "There is no longer an average year in California. Because of climate change, it has made the extremes kind of a constant in California." And you can skip down. The snowpack is at roughly 150% of its April 1st average, and most of the state's reservoirs are well above their historic averages. On the other hand, groundwater supplies, drastically depleted during the drought years, have yet to recover and in many cases continue to drop. So the state of California took this seriously. Governor Brown took it seriously. And in 2016, Governor Brown mandated that water supply agencies reduce water use by 25% during the drought. Wow, I really goofed up that quote. Governor Brown directed state agencies to take actions to use water more wisely, eliminate water waste, strengthen local drought resilience, and improve agricultural water use efficiency and drought planning. And then in 2018, we had some more legislation which Governor Brown signed, which also increased water conservation and drought planning mandates throughout the state. We're lucky right now. Since 2013, Santa Clara County has reduced on average 20%. And as Samantha said at the very end of her presentation, it's pretty much, we're lucky. We haven't seen the drastic bounce back that we have in previous years. That means that people are still thinking about keeping their water use low. We've also put in a lot of things in place, and I'll talk to you about that. A lot of our water conservation efforts are hopefully also responsible for the fact that we haven't had that much of a bounce back. It's heartening. It makes me also think that people are taking this seriously and taking climate change seriously. So you probably know why it's important to save water, not just to make sure that when you turn the tap, water comes out. But water conservation increases long-term water supply reliability, making sure that there's plenty for now and well into the future, and that's the main thing. But also, it helps in meeting short-term demands during a drought. It reduces reliance on the delta. So the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Incredibly fragile and really amazing, beautiful area. If you've never been there, you should spend some time in the Delta region. It's a lovely area. But that infrastructure, all those levees that you drive through, like when you're going by Rio Vista, all those levees, they're old. And one really good, really strong, when the big one comes, the big earthquake that we know is all coming, when that comes, a lot of those levees are going to give, and a lot of that infrastructure will be damaged. And about half of our water, as you saw, a little over half of our water comes through there, or is imported through there. And so we have to make sure that that conservation can help lessen the reliance on that delta water. By the way, that picture on the right-hand side, that's San Luis Reservoir. If you ever go down to Pacheco Pass, I think it's Highway 152, that was taken during the height of the drought. What you're seeing there is Pacheco Pass at a pretty low point. That is a water intake valve. And as you can see, the water intake valve is nowhere near the water. It's a pretty crazy picture. There's other pictures, too, that show water intake valves that are high and dry. Water conservation also saves energy. The number one water use of energy, the highest use of energy in the state of California is the transportation and the treatment of water. And so anytime you save water, you're also saving energy. You don't have to pump it. You don't have to treat it. You don't have to heat it, cool it, send it out into people's homes. So saving water really does also save energy. And it also reduces the greenhouse gas emissions for those things as well. And it also reduces urban runoff pollution. So when you see sprinklers that are overflowing on big playing fields that have been fertilized, and you see the water coursing into a storm drain, that's going right to a bay, to our bay, and that's carrying with it all of those fertilizers and those pesticides and other pollutants. So saving water is a good thing for so many different reasons. I alluded to water demands, to how much we use in Santa Clara County. Does anybody know how much the average person uses per day in a single-family home? Any guesses? Oh, it's so much higher than that. Somebody said 30 gallons. It's actually, in Santa Clara County right now, I think it's 115 gallons per person per day. 115, I know it's crazy. My husband and I have a single-family home in San Jose, not too far from here, and we use I think it's about 23 gallons per person per day, but we go to the gym, we shower at the gym, we work full-time, we both work full-time, and so we're not in the house that much, but it's still, since the house is empty most of the time, it's still 22, 23 gallons per person per day, depending on where we are. It's been rainy lately, so we haven't had to irrigate. Ours will go up a little bit more as the summer comes to us. This is a pretty interesting little pie graph because you can see in Santa Clara County, 55% of water use is residential water use. And of that 55%, about half of that goes to outdoor irrigation. So about half of this pie right here is going to water lawns. About 31% goes to businesses, and the rest in various and sundry other uses, including agriculture. This is the slide I included. Half of water used is used in homes outdoors, which it's a crazy statistic. So we have a lot of different programs at the Santa Clara Valley Water District that help people, encourage people to save water, not just residential, but also commercial, industrial, institutional, landscaping programs, agricultural programs, and we have a lot of outreach and education that we do. For residents, and you may have done this in your own home, we have a home water-wise survey program, both indoor and outdoor. We have, it's a free program. You can get outdoor water surveyors coming to your home and telling you how efficient your irrigation system is, what kind of programs that you could qualify for, how to make your irrigation system more efficient. It's a great program. And we have a do-it-yourself indoor water survey kit. If you haven't done this, you should call us up, get this kit, we'll send it to your home. You can measure the water use out of your faucets, your shower heads, see if you have efficient fixtures, and if you don't, we'd be happy to send them to you in the mail, send them to your house, and it's easy to change out your shower head, your faucet aerators. Those are easy things you can do to make sure that your home inside is just as efficient. We also have toilet flappers, too. That's a thing that commonly goes bad in people's homes and they don't know they have a leak. By the way, those pictures right there, that's a before and after. I didn't arrange them on the page that well, but if you saw bigger versions of both those pictures, you could really appreciate how in the top they had grass and it was boring. And in the bottom, they changed it out and they have some beautiful, sustainable, low water using landscape. And I'll talk about that too. We also have gray water rebate programs. We have a landscape rebate program. I'll talk to you a little bit more about both of those things. This is our WaterWise indoor survey program. I told you about that and about how it's kind of a great program, free program. We even have videos that you can watch that will take you through it step by step. And we have it translated into other languages. We're really serious about reaching everybody that we can and helping everybody to get as water efficient as possible. For our outdoor program, we have this free program for residents. By appointment, the person comes to your house, and they don't even give you a range. They give you an appointment. They'll say they're there at 3 o'clock. They'll be there at 3 o'clock. They'll evaluate your irrigation system. They'll identify problems that can be improved. They'll recommend upgrades and repairs, and they'll tell you about rebates that you may qualify for. It's a great program. We have a gray water laundry to landscape rebate. That is taking your clothes washer water and redirecting it when needed out to your irrigation. And it's kind of great. The state of California no longer requires a permit for this. So you can do it without getting a permit. It's a really simple system. We have lots of information on our website, and we even have a program right now that we're training installers, and we're trying to send out an army of people to install more gray water systems. It's kind of great. You can't use it for everything. It's not going to be great for watering lawn, but it's terrific for watering trees, especially fruit trees, and it's great for watering other kinds of plants in your garden. Kind of great. We're really proud of that program. This is our landscape rebate program, which very popular program. This program went nuts during the drought. We couldn't keep up with demand. It was crazy. And in fact, we even raised the rebate up during the drought to make it even more, to make it more of an incentive to participate. It's $1 per square foot right now. This is to take out your boring lawn and put in sustainable landscape. And some of our areas, some of our cities cost share with us, some of our water retailers cost share with us, which is really nice. Businesses have taken advantage of this. We've done probably at this point millions of square feet we've converted in Santa Clara County, taking out lawns and putting in sustainable landscape. One of the things that sustainable landscape is really good for, along with using less water, you're providing habitat for pollinators. You probably have seen in the news that insects, especially monarch butterflies, their populations have dramatically decreased. Part of that is climate change, part of that is loss of habitat. Well, the sustainable landscape will give them the habitat that they need to thrive and survive. We have, don't worry about this is all on our website. We have a rebate for irrigation equipment upgrades. I did this myself. I had a janky old irrigation controller, and I got a new, really nifty weather-based irrigation controller. So that's kind of nice. When it rains, irrigation shuts off, which is awesome. And truth be told, I actually haven't had my irrigation on for the last couple of years because my landscape is sustainable and it doesn't need much water at this point. I hand water some things. We have new rainwater and rainwater capture rebates, which is kind of exciting. We have rain barrels. We have a rebate for rain barrels, rebate for cisterns. We have a rebate for rain gardens. Kind of great. And the idea there is that you capture the water that we get, and you send it down into you send it percolating down, and it gets back to our groundwater. That's what we want to do. So you're not sending the water out into a storm drain and to the bay. What we're doing is we're capturing that water, sending it to our groundwater. It's helping to replenish our groundwater and keep our groundwater levels high. And that's important because we don't want subsidence. We have rebates for businesses. They're a big chunk of this too, and the rebates have been, the businesses have been taking advantage of our rebates, which is kind of great. We have a sub-meter rebate for multifamily dwellings. We have a custom or measured rebate for retrofitting equipment. We also have these pre-rinse sprayers for restaurants. So we have a lot of different things that we offer. This is our sub-meter rebates. If you live in a condo complex, an apartment complex, you probably don't pay a water bill. The idea with the sub-meters are, if you have one central water meter, sub-meters are at your individual unit, and you can see how much water that you use, and maybe even pay a water bill based on the amount of water that you use. This is a great incentive to save water, making people pay for how much water that they use. That's our Water Efficient Technologies program. This is a custom measured rebate that you actually have to put a water meter onto the line. And we've done some amazing, cool projects throughout Santa Clara County. One of them is, for example, at a laundromat down in Gilroy. They're taking rinse water from all of their clothes washers and putting it into a really cool on-site reuse system that's there in the back of their store, and it goes through a complicated process, and the water comes out and gets reused, which is incredible. We also have a water waste inspector program, and you can report, we have an app for your phone, and you can actually report water waste when you see it. I recommend you all download this app and report water waste. It's so fun to do. I'll admit it. I sometimes go running early in the morning, and I go through my neighborhood. And you could do like a map my run of my neighborhood by all the water reports that I do. We don't fine anybody, but we help them get more efficient. So you can see if neighbors have sprinklers that are, that maybe they've popped off and it's coursing down the sidewalk. You've seen that before. So this helps them get more water efficient. We have lots of education and outreach that we do. We have a summer outreach campaign. We go to events. You'll see us all over the place. And now that you know us, you'll end up seeing us all the time if you go to any events. In fact, we often do an Earth Day event here on campus. We do workshops. We have lots of literature, although we're trying to get away from handing out paper, and we're trying to do most of our stuff in the future online. I think that's a better way to do it. So now it turns out we have some time left over, and maybe Samantha can come up here and join me, and the two of us can answer any questions you might have about water supply planning, water conservation, or the district in general. If you have questions about water recycling, questions about the water district, we're here to answer your questions, so don't be shy.
And we've got two microphones, one on this side and one on that.
When you were talking about gray water to landscape, you can get a valve that redirects the landscape, but how do you get the detergent out of that gray water?
Yeah,
before it reaches your
that's
plants?
a great question. How do you get the detergents out of the gray water when you send it to out to the landscape? And the answer is you have to use special detergents. There are special detergents that are out there in the marketplace that are less toxic to plants and are good for the environment. We have a whole list of which detergents to use. They're commonly available. Some grocery stores even carry them, and they are happy for the environment. So those are the ones that you need to use when you use your gray water. That's a great question. You probably can't use water softener, fabric softeners. You can't use fabric softeners, that kind of thing. But you can use a special detergent, and it'll make everything much better. Yeah, great question.
Given the vast amount of incentives, financial incentives you have for consumers to improve their water consumption, there was a lot, but I probably missed it. But is there a rebate for switching to electric boilers instead?
Switching to what?
Switching from standard gas boilers to electric boilers, or is that totally irrelevant?
No, that's a really good question. We get that all the time. Switching your water heaters, switching from a standard water heater to, is that right? The
Yeah.
water heaters you're talking about,
Yeah.
like home water heaters, yeah. So we've been asked about this for years and years and years. You probably have seen these standard giant sort of cylindrical water heaters that are in everybody's homes. There are tankless water heaters, and there are also, so tankless water heaters, we get that question quite a bit, that are electric instead of gas. Tankless water heaters are not water savings. So those are, people talk about, it's never-ending hot water. So the thing with tankless water heaters is they tend to use more energy in total. So PG&E doesn't like them either. And PG&E offers rebates for lots of things that save energy. PG&E won't rebate those. We've done studies, and those ones don't save water and don't save energy. You can think about it this way. If you have a water heater and you have a bunch of people living in a home that want to take showers all at one time, and you have the standard gas cylindrical water heater, eventually you run out of hot water. It forces you to take a really, really short shower. That's a good thing. That's actually a water conservation measure. I tell people about that all the time. That's a sneaky one. For a tankless water heater, it never, ever, ever gets cold. It just stays hot all the time. What's the incentive to get out of there? So they don't actually save water. We have, though, heard about these on-demand systems where you press a button, you walk away, maybe make your coffee, have a cup of coffee, come back a couple minutes later, and it's on the spot, heated your water, so you don't have any warm-up time. So those ones can save water in certain circumstances. They end up being a lot higher in energy use, though, so it kind of balances out. What I tell people is collect your warm-up water in your shower when you're warming up your water in the morning. Collect it in a bucket and use that water in your bucket to flush your toilet or go outside and water your plants. We do that at our house. We still do that. We're not in a drought, and my husband and I still collect our warm-up water in a bucket. It just became a habit. And then we'll take that water and we'll flush our toilets with it. And that's a water saver right there. And it's pretty primitive, but it works. And doesn't use any energy except me and my husband carting it over. Yes?
Do you compete with other water districts to get water supplies?
Yes, we are the best. I'm just kidding. Do we compete? That's actually a question for you.
I wouldn't call it competition. So we do negotiate and work with them. We try to collaborate. I think right now with the state of water in California, it's a lot more of a regional collaboration question than it is competing. There's not a lot of new water rights out there, for example, for us to compete over. And there's, as far as buying additional imported water contracts, those tend to be more through a regional collaborative effort trying to figure out, because to get new contracts, that often will require using somebody else's system to get us that water because we already have our system in full usage. And so it's working with other districts like Contra Costa Water District and saying, well, if we buy this new contract water, will you work with us to put it in Los Vaqueros, for example? And they get the benefit of then we help them pay for Los Vaqueros. And so they won't get that contract water, we'll get it instead, but everybody gets a pro, and that's how the negotiations work, so it's not. Yeah.
My question is for earlier in your slides, you showed a water demand versus population graph. In the recent years, it was a significant drop in the demand. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, you might be better suited to answer this. It's primarily due to the conservation measures during the drought. And
it's conservation measures that we did. I'd like to take credit for it, but I can't. I can take credit for a little bit of it, but really the biggest credit needs to go to every single person and business in Santa Clara County that was freaked out by the drought for those 4 years. And everybody was sufficiently freaked out by the drought to really reduce the amount of water that they used. We haven't gotten to the point where we had to ration, but if it had continued, we would have gotten to that point, in which case our water use would have gone much farther down. I mean, our population we're at almost 2 million people here in Santa Clara County. And our population, as you saw, went up considerably in the last couple of decades, and it's going to probably continue to grow. But it's kind of great that our overall gallon per capita per day usage has been coming down and coming down and coming down. It's great. And we are not where we need to be eventually. So if you look at Melbourne, Australia, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Great Drought in Australia. A couple years ago, they emerged from about a 10-year drought, and they were really on the brink there. They really had, they were just squeaking by. And they really forced the people there to go down. And I think they went down to something like 20 gallons per person per day. It was really, really low. So people really buckled down and did a lot of great things in Melbourne that we could be doing too, and will happen. When we have our next big drought, if it lasts more than 4 or 5 years, if it goes to a 10-year drought, you'll start to see water use come down considerably. And yet all those lush playing fields, all those lush front yards, those will be a thing of the past.
And I will add that in our demand modeling, we do expect rebounds from droughts in demands. However, it is way more economical if people can actually continue to conserve at that level. Because right now, like we assumed a rebound, so if this is our projected regression line, then if it actually is down here, you have to invest in so much less infrastructure, and you can save millions and even billions of dollars by doing that.
Yep, that's exactly right. Water conservation is actually one of the most cost-effective ways to cost-effective water supplies. Investing in water conservation really ends up saving us a lot of money in the long run, which is great.
Are there any programs to try to increase the amount of water that's returned to the groundwater instead of diverting it?
Yeah, the amount of water that's returned to the groundwater, this little program right here, our rainwater capture rebate. This is a big deal right now in all of Santa Clara County, actually all over the state. People are talking about rainwater capture, and it's great. It's so smart, and it's what we should be doing, and we are investing heavily in it. Rain barrels don't save a lot of water in our area. They just don't. Rain barrels are about, you know, a standard rain barrel is about a 55-gallon drum, maybe a little bit less, maybe a 40-gallon drum. And it captures the rain that we get, and we only get the rain during a pretty small window of time. This year, we've actually had quite a bit, but you know, typically in California, there's a 3 or 4 month period where we get rain, right? And so you can fill it up, and that will not last you very long during the long, hot months of summer. You'll go through that really, really fast. They don't save a lot of water, but rain gardens, directing your downspouts into rain gardens and capturing that water to try to keep our groundwater supplies and a happy and healthy and high, that's incredible. And there's a lot of really cool programs. The city of San Jose is doing a lot right now. In fact, they've got these things that they're doing where they're taking out some of the impervious pavement, and they're putting in permeable landscaping in some streets, these green streets that are doing. It's called green infrastructure, and it's the hot new thing in our industry, and you hear about green infrastructure, and it's super cool. One thing I want them to do is I want them to do cuts in the concrete on our street, along the sidewalks, against the sidewalks, along the rain gutters. I want them to cut out little bits and pieces here and there, and so that water can infiltrate and sink down when we have rain instead of coursing over to the storm drain and going to the bay. It's kind of great. A lot of cities are doing that. It's a big thing for us. So we're just starting. It's neat. And actually, you want to talk about your stormwater capture?
Sure, yeah. So there's also, at the district, we have 2 types of groundwater recharge stormwater capture approaches. There is centralized and decentralized, which she just went into is really our decentralized program, so things that residents can do. However, we have a huge centralized program. So we have recharge ponds, for example, throughout the county, and those we put local and imported supplies directly into the ground. Then we're also planning for larger stormwater capture projects. We're going to see if we can take water from a larger surrounding landscape into a pond, perhaps a park, for example, that we're looking at. And yeah, I guess
yeah.
And so we're looking at those projects through what's called the Stormwater Resources Plan. So if you have any interest in the different types of stormwater capture projects we're going into, it's all in that plan available on our website.
We love plans of the district. We have about 5 million plans.
Yeah. It's how we get money. That's what the state requires.
Yeah. They require us to know what we're doing, plan for the future, and that way they can entrust us in this water.
We have another question right here.
I looked it up and it said that in like California as a whole, 80% of the water use is for agriculture. And I was wondering, because I drive through a lot and it seems like things are being grown in what looks like the desert. And I was wondering how much of California's water problems are just based in growing plants that shouldn't really be growing.
You want to field that one? No pun intended, or do you want me to?
I'll give it a high level, and so I wouldn't go so far as to blame ag for water issues. I think everybody needs water, right? And everybody also needs to eat. And I will say that in Santa Clara County, I'll speak for our county, we work a lot with the ag community to make sure they are using very water conservation forward approaches, so reducing their impact on the groundwater basin as much as possible.
And you're absolutely right. For a long time, farmers in the Central Valley kind of got a pass with water, and they were not encouraged to utilize the most efficient irrigation practices. If you go through sometimes in the heat of the summer, you will see overhead irrigation. And that is the worst kind of irrigation and the worst time to irrigate. You want to irrigate when it's cool, and you want to irrigate close to the ground, as close to the ground as possible. You don't want to project your water high into the air because it evaporates, and you end up losing a giant portion of your water. So California really cracked down on that, and farmers are being encouraged way more to have efficient irrigation practices, and it's really being transformed in the state of California. But and there's give and take with the different kinds of crops, right? So rice farming. When you see rice farming in California, you think, why are we doing rice farming in California? It's an intensive flood kind of irrigation. It also provides a lot of habitat for migratory waterfowl that come through the state. So there's sort of pros and cons for that and the different kinds of crops. We also have a lot of almond farming. Almond farming gets the brunt of a lot of criticism because it takes a lot of water to grow almond trees. By the way, if you drive down Santa Teresa Boulevard in South San Jose towards Morgan Hill, towards like San Martin, Morgan Hill, you'll see brand new orchards just planted that are almond. So it's becoming, people drink almond milk, they eat almonds, almonds a thing. And we export a lot of that. We export a lot of those crops to other countries. So water is a very complex issue in the state of California. And a lot of people have opinions, and a lot of transformation is happening. A lot more is going to happen. Another drought, and you'll see even more transformation. It's a great question, though.
One fun thing, though, about ag is that they are working on stormwater capture with the state and locally. So a new type of recharge that's being investigated, it's called flood-managed aquifer recharge. And so a lot of the orchards in the Central Valley, there's also some farmers down in the Pajaro Valley that are working on creating infrastructure to divert high flows from rivers to flood their fields during the winter and recharge these overdrafted groundwater basins. And it has so far proven to be extremely effective.
Yeah, in the Central Valley, there are pictures during the height of the drought. There were pictures of some of the land subsidence, and some people. There was a famous picture of somebody's foundation, and you could stand on one side of the house, and the ground had subsided so much, and their house stayed because it had a giant foundation. You could actually see all the way under their house where the ground had subsided. And roads and things there were crazy roads now in Central Valley, but they're really trying to address that. They're getting more serious.
Okay.
So Anderson Dam is being retrofitted right now. I was just wondering if you guys knew the whole process on that and the estimated completion date.
Yeah. So the estimated completion date right now is 2028. We're working on our permits. Right now they're with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and so once those get signed off, that is pretty much the holdup right now on getting that going. We're expecting to be in construction in 2021, but of course you have to see how permits go. So with that, the plan is it would be dewatered for 3 years, and we would need alternate supplies for those 3 years for what Anderson provides, which is around, in a normal year, it provides around 20,000 acre feet of supply, which we can replace. We're working with other water districts right now for exchanges during those years where perhaps, so Los Vaqueros again as an example, they'll also be adjusting their reservoir, raising the height of their reservoir in the future. So if they give us supplies now, then when their reservoir is out, we can give it later, so pay it back later. So we're working out things like that to help us through that period.
Okay, that's all the question time we have for today. just want to say, let's give our guests another hand. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we'll see everyone next week.